So, can you actually prove a creator exists using just logic? That's a huge question, right? Well, today we're going to dive into one author's really ambitious attempt to do exactly that through what he calls 8 logical deductions. And his whole argument starts by tackling some of the biggest questions we've ever asked ourselves. First up, you've got the classic. Where did we even come from? I mean, whether you're staring up at the night sky or just thinking about your own life, it's impossible not to wonder, how did all this get started? And then there's this puzzle of structure. Why isn't everything just a mess? Planets stick to their orbits, seasons change like clockwork, and DNA. Wow, DNA encodes life with this unbelievable precision. So why all this order in the universe? Why isn't it just random, meaningless chaos? And that brings us to the big one, the most personal question of all. What's our purpose? Are we just some kind of cosmic accident, a fluke? Or is there a deeper reason we're here? It's these 3 huge questions that an author named Zhu Feng tries to answer in his work, 8 Logical Deductions. So let's unpack his case. He basically builds it around 3 core ideas. All right, so the first part of his argument is all about beginnings. It's built on a pretty simple idea. If you follow any chain of events backward, you have to find a starting point eventually, right? The author lays out this first cause idea using 4 different lines of reasoning. He's going to look at where everything comes from, the origin of all motion, the essence of all form, and that very first link in the whole chain of cause and effect. So the first deduction kicks off with sources. The author points out something that feels like common sense, right? Everything from a giant river like the Amazon to a simple pencil in your hand, you can trace it back to where it came from. Nothing just poof appears out of nowhere. And if that's true for everything inside the universe, his argument goes, then the universe itself must have some kind of ultimate source. And what's really interesting is how the next 2 deductions basically follow that exact same logic. The second one argues that all motion, we're talking planets orbiting, blood pumping through our veins, everything, it all needs that first initial push to get going. And the third deduction argues the same thing for forms. From a house to a mountain, you need energy to shape it. So both of these arguments point to the exact same conclusion. There has to be some single, uncaused, unconstrained source of energy that kicked the whole thing off. And the final piece of this first cause puzzle is a principle we see every single day of our lives: cause and effect. To really drive this point home, the author pulls examples from, everywhere. From something small and personal like getting a headache, all the way up to a massive global event like the sinking of the Titanic or even the collapse of the entire Mayan civilization. The point is, everything is the result of stuff that happened before. Basically, nothing happens for no reason. So, this all naturally leads to a huge question. If every effect has a cause, and that cause was the effect of a previous cause, and so on, what happens when you rewind all the way to the very, very beginning of the chain? The author's answer is that there must have been a first cause, one that wasn't caused by anything else. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears. We're moving from origins to purpose. This second part of the argument looks for what the author sees as evidence of an intentional design, a plan in the universe. His 5th deduction lays out this chain of purpose in the natural world. In the author's view, it works like this. Microbes exist to make the soil fertile. The soil exists to grow plants. Plants are there to feed animals. And all of that, it's all there to serve us, humanity. So that leads to a pretty critical question. If everything serves us, who or what do we serve? And the text gives a very direct answer to that. Just like everything else in nature serves something higher up the chain, humanity's ultimate purpose, according to the author, is to serve this greatest creator. The 6th deduction takes this idea of hierarchy and just blows it up into this huge classification system for, everything. As you can see here, the author maps out all of existence from what he calls life in molten lava, all the way up to the greatest creator. And he even proposes this really detailed breakdown of 18 different grades for humanity, placing figures like Jesus and Laozi at the very top, and people who invert right and wrong at the absolute bottom. All right, the final part of this argument is all about the rules, the laws, both the ones we can see and the ones we can't, that seem to run the show. So the 7th deduction points to what the author sees as the undeniable order of the universe. He argues that some rules just seem, unbreakable. Think about it. Any social group, whether it's an ant colony or a whole country, really only functions with one leader. The cycle of life, birth, life, death, it's absolute. And the laws of physics, they're constant. So the author asks a simple question. Who wrote the laws? Now, the eighth and final deduction is maybe the most unusual one. It's about something the author calls universal resonance, this idea that there's a hidden, subconscious link between everything. And to make his point, he uses some pretty wild anecdotes, starting with a classic piece of literature. In Robinson Crusoe, the main character has this inner resistance, this powerful gut feeling about traveling by sea that ends up saving his life not once, but twice. Then he brings up what's described as a biological experiment. According to this account, when a snail in Paris was stimulated with electricity, its paired snail, all the way over in the United States, supposedly reacted at the very same instant. For the author, this points to a connection that just defies our normal understanding of space and time. But the author's final piece of evidence for this resonance is a story that involves three really famous people. In a supposed meeting, the psychologist Freud allegedly sent a silent mental command to a well-known medium, Wolf Messing. And what was the command? Messing then walked over and plucked 3 whiskers from Albert Einstein's chin, apparently carrying out the unspoken instruction perfectly. So how does the author interpret these incredible stories? He sees them as proof of a universal hierarchy of command. The idea is that beings on a lower level subconsciously get and then act on these implicit instructions from beings on a higher level. Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together and see where this all leads, what the author's final conclusion actually is. So we've walked through the author's case, right? It's built on 3 big pillars: the argument for a first cause, an argument for a grand designer, and one for a universal lawgiver. And all of that is supported by his 8 specific deductions. And this is it. This is the author's ultimate claim. He concludes that every single chain we've looked at, the chain of cause and effect, the chain of purpose, the chain of order, and even this chain of subconscious command, they all have to end somewhere. And when you follow them all the way back to their absolute origin, they terminate at one single point: the greatest creator. So we've just walked through one author's attempt to build a purely logical case for existence, and it leaves us with a really fascinating thought to chew on. When you set aside faith, when you set aside gut feelings, what is it that makes a logical argument, on any topic really, truly convincing to you?